Okay, welcome everyone. So our next talk in this room is going to be from Joseph DiStefano III from UCLA, and they are going to be giving their presentation on modeling for life scientists, appreciating and learning it. So I will now give the floor over to them, and I can't wait to hear your talk.
Thank you. I'm sharing my screen, correct?
Your screen is being shared. It's starting screen sharing right now. Yes, now we can see your slides.
Good?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so the title of my talk is The Challenges of Teaching Dynamic System Modeling to Undergraduates in Diverse Disciplines, something that I'm doing currently, and I'll tell you more about that shortly. So I've been teaching at UCLA and pretty much teaching in the same subject for 57 years. When people ask me when I'm going to retire, I tell them I'm going to die at the podium. I hope not, and I do hope that I retire before that time. But in the meantime, I'm having a great time, and I'm learning an enormous amount about how to teach to diverse students at lower levels than I was used to up until the late or mid 90s. Okay, so I've been basically teaching two courses, three actually, over this period. From 66 to 93, I had an undergraduate course called Modeling and Simulation of Dynamic Biosystems. And that course was relatively high level. And I was teaching it mostly to engineers until later when I got involved in this. Well, at the time it was called the Cybernetics Interdepartmental Undergraduate Program. And these students were much better educated in mathematics than currently. In engineering at UCLA, we have 2 years of math. In computational and systems biology currently, formerly, up until 2016, we had 3 years of math because we added some more things like control theory, systems and signals, statistics, and probability. So our students were much better schooled. And they also had a lot of biology because that was, so they were mostly computational systems biology students that I taught through about 93. So I didn't have any serious problems with math. And I didn't really have any serious problems with them understanding biology either. I was teaching it in two levels, and I also had a graduate course, so that was the same course, which was significantly higher mathematical level. For economic reasons or budgetary reasons, I combined the two courses, the undergraduate and graduate course, obviously watered it down in about 94, reorganized it, and I'm still teaching that actually once a year. In 2016, I gave up the being the chair of the Computational Systems Biology IDP, and basically at that time, they decided that they wanted a much larger program and they watered down the math requirements very substantially. So I designed a new course, which I'm currently teaching, and I started teaching in 2018 and have changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years now. This is a sophomore junior level course. It's called Dynamic Biosystems Modeling and Simulation Methodology, and that's really all it's about. And the requirements are 2 quarters of introductory math, no differential equations, no linear algebra. So I basically teach them the beginnings of that. My course is not about differential equations, it's about modeling, modeling biological systems. Now, currently, in my current course, this year, I typically, well, I can get up to 100 students, but I have currently about 30. Last quarter, I had about 50, and typically I try to limit to about 50. Since I'm in the computer science department primarily, and students in computer science need courses to take, I get a lot of CS students. So CS, bioengineering, math, mathematics of computation. These are the students in the departments that I'm currently teaching. Computational systems biology, statistics, and then in blue here, those that don't have much math, cognitive science, neuroscience, anthropology, economics, psychobiology, biochemistry, and political science. So you can see that I have what the challenge might be. So I'm teaching from the third edition now of my book. For between the first edition and the second, I changed it dramatically. And between the second and third, I updated it very substantially, and mostly by learning to teach this variety of students. And most of the problems are in teaching them modeling, not mathematics. So here's I try to lay out the topics here, the levels of difficulty depending on the major. So first of all, my philosophy is I come from a systems and control background, and so systems and control concepts are my primary paradigm for formulating, of course, mixed with the usual compartmental and other ideas that come from the other paradigms doing biological modeling. So systems and control concepts, actually all of the students, particularly CS, not so much bioengineering, have difficulties with this at first. Biology and physiology, yeah, even those students who come from the life sciences have difficulty putting these things together in a practical way so that we can make modeling. So, but certainly they know far more than the engineering-based students. Another problem that they have is given a biological description, and I'll show you how I developed this, they have problems with diagramming. And I think, and most all of them. And so I spent a lot of effort on this. And I spent a lot of effort on nomenclature and symbolism and translating words, for example, let me see, turning words into standardized math symbols. And most of the non-STEM students have more problems with that. Certainly the engineering students have less. Symbols are difficult, and I'm constantly reinforcing that in the class and in the worksheets that they do. Let's see. Yeah, and finally, just the lack of experience that the non-STEM students in particular have in turning words into graphs. This is something that I was actually working with this past week a lot, and we had a worksheet on it as well. For example, I put a step input into a two-compartment model, which is very simple, and or I put a pulse input. How do we translate this into outputs? So I asked them to draw a picture of the input and draw a picture of the output. So, and this is after I've given them, let's say we're in the fifth week, an understanding of what dynamic systems are and the solutions to differential equations. And they've had now a lot of lab experience also simulating things. And so let me get on with that. So these are the common problems that I find across the board. Okay, I discovered 2 years ago, basically through evaluations of me in my teaching. And for example, one or more students said, hey, I'm from CS and I want to do some coding. And one of the things that I do is say, there's no coding in this class. We don't do coding. And so I've got to make it clear, I felt, that in the syllabus, who should not be taking the class, okay? And so the first thing was those who have no interest in life sciences, and there are too many of those. And those who expect to hone their coding or biolab skills, none needed, not included. So those who need to take it are interested in what I'm teaching, and mostly I'm teaching mechanistic, inside the box modeling. And the CS students, surprisingly, have been interested in this because they want to fill up the black boxes in machine learning. So that's the basic concept here. In fact, one of my research interests right now is hybrid modeling, how to do this. Okay, so what helps the most? Well, they certainly need the usual drilling, and I give them weekly homework exercises, which actually take a lot of time. I found that what they like the most is I'm doing every week now, based on the same week lectures. We have a collaborative worksheet and then lab sessions as well. But the collaborative worksheet lays out questions for them, which they have to fill in, and about what I've been talking about that week, this week, for example. And so they have an opportunity to reinforce what I'm saying if they've been listening, in the same week. So I spend about an hour doing that on Thursday in a 4-hour lecture week. In the lab sessions, they do pretty much the same thing. They're working on a lab based on what I've been teaching that week. So, for example, last week I taught about Michaelis-Menten kinetics, and so they did a lab on Michaelis-Menten simulations and quasi-steady state approximations. So they got to reinforce that idea. TA and learning assistant sessions. I found that learning assistants in my courses over the past 4 years since we've had that opportunity at UCLA have been really, really instrumental in helping the students learn, particularly learn in groups. So I found, in fact, in my collaborative worksheet sessions, I force the students to work together. I tell them that they have to have at least one other partner to sit down and put their two heads together to work out the problems. And then the LAs, the TA, and myself walk around the room helping them with it. And it works very, very well. They have Piazza as a forum for communication. And of course, I've listened a great deal to the anonymous student evaluations, sometimes which are very good, sometimes which are not so good, particularly during the pandemic, when I sort of didn't force them to come to class being online, of course. Okay, so nomenclature. This is something that they have a lot of difficulty with. So I spend efforts on defining what's a biosystem, what's a mechanistic biosystem model. And so we talk about this in class, and they have drills on this. So here, for example, is 3 different qualitative mechanistic biomodel examples from different areas: biochemistry, control systems biology, and cell biology. Okay, so basically, I begin in the early lectures to talk about what models of systems, what their characteristics are. They satisfy goals. They represent essential features, and we talk about unessential features, inputs, outputs, stimuli responses, and simplifications, of course. So I spend a lot of time on this. In fact, I would say 5 out of the 12 chapters are essentially at approximately this level. So here I'm describing the system of driving a car. 2 components: road is the environment. The goal is to navigate the fixed road. Later, if I don't run out of time, I'll show you some simple block diagram example of this. I make a big distinction between models of systems and models of data. And so this, of course, being a model of data. So mechanistic modeling integrated with the biology. And I actually spend a great deal of time talking about the biology. I'll mention a few things in a few moments about that. I use Simulink. And the reason I use Simulink is because it's a control system diagram. And you see the model, not the code. We don't care about the code in my class. The second thing is, and I think this is kind of unique to my class, I teach from first principles, namely conservation of flux, mass action, and feedback. And I describe these principles and how we get mathematical equations, or pardon me, first diagrams from them, and then how we translate that into mathematical equations. So here's the biology and physiology. I talk about biochemistry, cell biology, membranes and membrane transport, because dynamics is important in modeling, the kinds of modeling that I'm teaching. and the rest of these subjects. And I spend a little bit more effort on gene expression because gene expression models really have, I use that as the basis of many things in expressing, in describing the goals of my course. And then vascular and tissue anatomy and physiology. Of course, this is essential to turning a biological system into components and how they communicate with each other. So how to translate the bioobjects and the phenomena into structural mechanistic models, and then finally mathematical models. So variables, parameters, and functions of parameters. This is something that really trips up most students, making the distinction. So here's some examples. So y equals ku, symbolic math model. Y and u are variables, k is a parameter. In my world, parameters are all constant and they're all non-negative. 22u is a quantitative math model. Y greater than ku, an algebraic inequality, another math model. And then, of course, here's a nonlinear differential equation. I make a big fuss about this Michaelis-Menten type function, ay over b plus y, being a function of parameters and variables. And in fact, most of the modeling I do is with v functions defining the arrows in the model. Okay, so a lot of effort assigning variables and parameters in a system. And so here, modeling from a physiological textbook, defining the variables and variables and parameters. Same thing here. Now we get a little bit more abstract in this thyroid hormone regulation system, and its cousin, this biochemical detail here in the sources and sinks in local enzyme control. They need to define what the variables are and the biochemicals, making a distinction also between the state variables and the variables and the parameters in the model. Okay, again, supporting the idea that all of the different paradigms, the different flavors, have variables, parameters, and functions of parameters. So here, some of the ways that these paradigms are described here in pharmacology, here in biology, and here in biochemistry, and here in physiology, and here in biochemistry, and here in computer science and biology. Here's a predator-prey simulation model of sharks and tunas interacting, the differential equations, and here's the Simulink diagram. And the Simulink diagram shows how we have integration, we have feedback because we have leaks in the system, we have integration to state variables, and we have, and I asked them, of course, to define the variables and parameters in this. But most important here is showing the couplings between two first-order ordinary differential equations. And of course, here in terms of simplification, I quote that supposedly attributed to Einstein that everything should be as simple as possible, but not too much so. And I demonstrate this with the Arthur Guyton and Coleman model in Annual Review of Physiology, which takes 4 pages, fold out, and this is a kind of a famous model now that they published in 1972. But this is all very one-to-one with the subsystem models in regulation of the human circulation system. It's certainly the most complicated one that I've ever experienced, but it's not that complicated, is it, relative to what the system is? Okay, so 49. So in describing mathematical models, I laid them out in the key topics here. And of course, linearity and nonlinearity are really important. But let me just give you a couple of ideas here. Okay, defining ODEs. Yeah, so what do I teach in differential equations? Well, certainly what they are, and that they represent rates of change of dependent variables. And of course, these turn into state variables. And time is the only independent variable, and ODEs is all I consider. And the dependent variables are the state variables, and they relate to the biochemicals in the model. in the context of coupled first order equations. The only higher order equation I do is with Newton's law, because it has 3 different kinds of models in it. But anyway, this is really important. So I show them that if you have a mass and you have an equation representing this mass, dq dt equals some terms, then you've got to integrate it. And when you integrate it, there's an initial condition. And this makes the distinction between a dynamic and a non-dynamic system. So this is the block diagram I show them. And we talk about the memory of the system here, which needs to be introduced at this point in order to compute the solution of the differential equation Q. Okay, coupled first order differential equations. So here I show that F equals MA can be an algebraic model, or it can be 2 different kinds of differential equation models. Constantly clarifying the meanings of the symbols, the variables, the parameters, state variables, input variable, output variable, model of population growth, and then its solution is a very, of course, this unrealistic model of Malthusian population growth, and then coupling it, which later came limited by nutrient supply and became the logistic population growth equation. So here we now have our first 2 coupled differential equations and their solutions. Linear and nonlinear models, certainly the biggest distinction that needs to be made, and I drill them quite a bit on this. I want to introduce them eventually later on, about halfway through. I just began it now and halfway through the quarter to vector matrix equations, which is a little bit difficult for them at first, but I introduce it slowly. And here showing them, here's we're going to make equations that generally look like this, but more specifically look like this when we put them together. So this is 2 differential equations, 2 state variables with some nonlinear terms in it, output measurement model. And then I go on to make some very specific definitions of what a dynamic system is and juxtapose it. Here's a dynamic system with 2 different solutions from 2 different different initial conditions, and then juxtapose this with non-dynamic systems. Best example being Ohm's law or Poisson's, which is pretty much the same thing in fluid flow. Then I introduce the concept of multi-scale models by just looking at the time domain and stretching it out. So here's a solution of a first order differential equation as an exponential. We step back a ways and it looks like it's going faster. And now we step back 100 time distances, 100 time 100-fold way. And now it looks like an impulse or an initial condition. And so when we couple this to other equations, then this equation is going to become an algebraic constraint on the others. So that's how I introduce constraint-based differential equations and multi-scale models. But mostly, this is about the concept. And this is hard. And I, of course, then I introduce it with respect to when I introduce Michaelis-Menten kinetics, which, of course, is multi-scale until you take the quasi-steady state approximation here, and then it's not stiff anymore. Hey, yeah, it's multi-scale inherently, but it's not stiff anymore. Balancing units in equations. This is another thing that's tough, pretty much for everybody. So knowing what the units of K are in each of these equations, the linear and the nonlinear one, that's tough. But they learn that fairly quickly. This is something that I utilize in how to turn impulse inputs into initial conditions, and how this, of course, is basic in simulation. Namely, if you have a very quick pulse and you want to implement that in a Simulink simulation, well, you're not going to try to make an impulse out of it. What you'll do is you'll turn it into an initial condition. And so they get to work with this in the context then of superposition and how to formulate models using impulses or approximate impulses, steps and initial conditions and other inputs. So basically, then here we have, and this is the last thing I'll talk about, is cell diagram cartoon of gene expression, okay, from the gene making a messenger, making a protein, and then this is translated into a graph, okay, with two state variables in it. And I make a distinction between the dashed line here, which I call a let's see, I think I call this, this is a line where no DNA is used up in stimulating mRNA. So this is a signal wire, whereas this is a leak wire. So the degradation of messenger in the cell is done differently than being used up, messenger being used up. It's not used up in making a protein. So this is another signal arrow, and this is not a signal arrow, but a leak arrow. So I make these distinctions, and the reason is because if you think that that this is all based on flux balance, well, then you're going to write the wrong differential equations. So this then forces you to write the correct differential equations. Again, I use Simulink because you get to see the model and its connections and not the code. And I think I probably have run out of time, haven't I? Hello?
Yeah, so we are coming to the end of our allotted time. Thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Though we do have a couple minutes if anyone has some closing questions.
Sure. So
does anyone have any questions for Joe?
Oh, this is a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sammy.
I like how your course focuses on teaching the modeling and maybe not focusing so much heavy on the programming and just focusing on how do you turn compartments into equations and that sort of thing. And it's something that I'm passionate about as well. And I'm actually giving a talk later, I think at 5:30 on how to do that without any programming. So just understanding how to convert sort of the compartments into equations and just sort of clicking go and simulating them. I hope you can attend that because this is really exciting to me.
Yeah, so that's at 5:30 in
the main room. In this, I think this is the
main room. Got it. No, we're in room 1 now. But I will see it there.
Yeah.
I have that asterisk.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So in that context, I do want to just say that when I do teach a little bit about the nitty-gritty of formulating algorithms for solving differential equations, just a bit, and I get up to Runge Kutta, but mostly I focus on errors and how to detect errors in solution, and how to fix that by using the control parameters in the simulation algorithm. So we have a whole lab on that. I'll give a lecture and a lab on that because I've seen examples in the literature of simulations of chaotic differential equations that were completely wrong, of course, the simulations, because they used an algorithm that didn't work. I have examples, of course, in my own course right here too, in my book, where the solutions look wonderful, but they're wrong because they smooth out oscillations that are supposed to be in it, perfectly stable, but wrong. And it's important for students who don't do the coding, who don't understand the math, to realize that these are issues that you have to contend with if you're not going to be hurting people when you work for the pharmaceutical company, or elsewhere. So that's basically my focus. Yeah. Thank you. And I will be at your talk.
Thank you so much for answering those questions. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day at the conference.
Thank you.